Well, hello xenographers everywhere and welcome to another episode. I get lots of comments from people suggesting that I should try Minolta Rokkor lenses, and I've finally got hold of one. This is the Minolta Rokkor PF f1.4 and it's a 58mm focal length. But this isn't just any old Minolta Rokkor 1.4. This is the worst Minolta Rokkor 1.4 in the world. It really is in pretty awful condition. The aperture ring is stuck, or that is to say the blades are stuck at around about f8. The focus ring is extremely stiff and sticky, and it varies, so sometimes it's smooth at certain points, other times it isn't. The front thing here is loose. There's a lot of fungus in the lens. It really is one heck of a mess. So this lens really is just a scrap lens. So it's lenses like this in very poor condition that you can't really use anyway that are the best lenses to practice a little bit of lens stripping and cleaning with. Now, don't misunderstand me, I am not an expert in lens restoration, but I am prepared to do a little bit. The key with this process is don't dismantle too much. Keep your dismantling minimal. Lenses are very tricky to get back together, and there's all sorts of tiny little parts and screws that you can easily lose, and sometimes it's just really difficult to get them back together. So minimal dismantling, and that's what we're going to do with this one. We're going to take out the front element, we're going to take out the rear element, and we're going to clean those up, and then we're going to have a look under here at the rear to see what's going on with the aperture mechanism and whether there's any easy way I can just link that up. It's not working at all at the moment, so this really is a case of kill or cure. And hopefully if we can get it back to something resembling working order, we're then going to go out and shoot it. So once we've got the top two rings off, we can now see that this front element is loose, so that means that somebody's been inside this lens before, which was fairly obvious with this one. There are three concentric rings, each with spanner slots in them. So there's one ring here, one ring just right next to it, and another ring right next to that. The loose one is the middle ring. So given that it's loose already, I'm going to give it a turn and see what happens. So here's our front optical block. Now I can see, looking inside this lens here, that there is quite a bit of dirt behind this front element, so we're going to have to get that out. And there is our front optical element. You can see that it's pretty dirty, so we'll give this a wash with water and vinegar to kill any fungus that's on there. We may need to open up and go a bit further. I think I can see a tiny little bit of fungus just between these elements here. These are two elements together. There's one at the front and one at the back. So we're going to take that one out as well and give that a clean too. Here is our doublet now separated. I can see that the fungus is just on the inside of this element here, so we'll give that a nice clean. So with the front partially dismantled, we now turn our attention to the back of the lens, and what we're going to do is try and get this rear optical block out. There are again two concentric rings, so we're going to undo the outer one, which should bring out the whole of the optical block. And here is our rear optical block. My goodness, there is plenty of dirt in this lens. It looks like it's been at the bottom of a lake for a month or two. The other thing we want to do while we're looking in this lens is see if we can get this aperture working. This aperture pin is supposed to move the blades, but I don't know if you can see there, it doesn't really do very much to speak of. I'm going to stick to the principle of minimal dismantling, and I'm going to run plenty of this stuff, lighter fluid, through that lens and see if I can free some of that dirt and reconstitute some of that old lubrication and get things moving again. So here's our little can of lighter fluid, and we've got a paintbrush, small paintbrush, and what we're going to do is douse this mechanism in this stuff. Get plenty of it in, let it get to wherever it can get to, and then work the mechanism. And that's now freeing up nicely. Let's try and sort this aperture mechanism out. Be very, very careful when you're doing anything with aperture blades because they are really, really delicate. So there we are. We seem to have freed off the aperture to the extent that it will now open and close without any problem. Well, the news is not great, I'm afraid. This lens has a fault between the aperture ring and the actual mechanism that makes the aperture blades move. So unfortunately, whatever I do and however I clean it, that's not going to be resolved. So I think I've now reached the limit of my capabilities. So I'm not going to dive into this lens any further. What I'm going to do with this lens, we do have aperture function using this little lever here. So what I'm going to do is put it all back together, fix this pin open and use it as a fixed aperture f1.4 lens, at least until I can come back to it, do a bit of research and maybe do a bit more dismantling. So it is important to realise when you reach the limit of your skills, and what we've got here now is, when it's put back together, a lens that will be usable rather than not usable. You might ask yourself, have I done a good repair? Well, in this case it's clearly not a perfect repair, but we've brought a scrap lens back to the point where it can at least be used. It's better than it was before. So in my opinion, that is a successful-ish repair. So let's get this little lens back together. In use, this lens was quite a revelation, even though the focus ring jammed up solid almost immediately and wouldn't focus any further back than 1.2 meters. There's clearly more work required here. Nevertheless, the shots I did manage to get show that this lens is really quite something. Minolta Rokkor lenses have a great reputation for colour rendition, and this one certainly lived up to it. Colours are bright, punchy, boosted and saturated, just the way I like them in fact. Colours leap right out of the image, full of vibrancy and energy, quite unstoppable. And yet it has something of a dual character too, because while colours are for the most part bright and vibrant, in the right light they can become more delicate and subtle, gentler and less in your face, seeming to shift a little towards the cooler end of the spectrum. Just beautiful. Colour rendition is a very subtle thing, and the actual difference between lenses is probably very small. Nevertheless, I think this lens, as far as colours go, is one of the nicest I've used. It reminds me of the Helios 40 and the Olympus 55mm f1.2, both of which like to boost colours to the max as well. With a light source in the frame, the lens loses contrast quickly, and like the Helios 44, you sometimes get reflections off the edges of the optical elements themselves. Technically a flaw, but one that I kinda like. If there's no strong light source in the frame though, contrast is actually pretty good, lending loads of depth and punch to images. In the area of sharpness, this lens is definitely in the sharp enough category. I think this must be quite an early version of the lens. It's a fairly old design with a wide aperture, so it was never going to be a lens that's so sharp you can cut yourself. It resolves plenty of fine detail for sure, but it's not so sharp as a knife. Instead, it's one of those rare things, a lens with character, and the slight softness it gives has a dreamy quality. It makes images that feel beautiful, and for me, that's a quality that's far more important than cold, harsh measurements of technical performance. In the background blur department, this lens more than delivers, as you might expect from its f1.4 aperture and longish focal length. Blur is soft and smooth, creamy, dreamy and delicious. Form and shape disappear, and we're left with a great big soft, smooth, blurry wash. It'll fall off with distance, of course, and there'll probably be a harsh spot or two as well, though as I couldn't focus further back than 1.2 meters, I can't demonstrate that. Even below this distance though, there are points where a bit of nervousness becomes apparent, although I don't find it distracting or unpleasant. In fact, I think it adds something to the character of the lens. It's one of those cases where a technical flaw has a very pleasing effect, much like the Helios 40 and 44 in fact. Point light sources, as you might expect, give lots of lovely bubbles, circular in the centre, giving way to elliptical cat-sized shapes towards the edges. Pretty much standard for a vintage lens, and while those bubbles do sometimes stack up on top of each other, giving a slight nervousness, they don't seem to leach into each other to give any kind of swirl effect. So, we're clearly not there yet with this lens, and it's going to need quite a bit more work before it's a usable piece of kit. To be honest, I'm not sure I'm equal to the full dismantling it needs. What this project has shown me though is that this is a really nice little lens, and that a good one is probably something quite special. I suspect this might be one of those lenses that are more than the sum of their parts, in which technical flaws become aesthetic virtues, a lens that has a little bit of magic. And I'm definitely going to look out for a good one if I can't take this one any further. So that's it from me for now. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring the bell before you go. And if you like the content on this channel and you'd like to support it, you can do so at patreon.com/Zenography. As ever, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time for some more Zenography.